right. Can I move this forward? Because I'm going to. I don't know why I asked for permission. I'm going to do it anyway. It is a good morning to be reading this book today. When I talk about the books, there are some, when I talk about, we're going through the Gospel according to Dr. Seuss. And the whole reason is because, as you've heard me say, when we find truth anywhere, it's God's truth. God's the God of all truth, and all truth is God's truth. And so when we find truth, we can say it comes from God, and we should be able to see when we find truth how it can relate into our lives. And so when we're using Dr. Seuss, but we could be using anything. We could be using a TV series. Not all of them are great. You can't use every one of them, but a lot of them give good lessons. You could do the Gospel according to Andy Griffith in the same way and get lots of good things that maybe were truthful about what we can learn about life from these things. And so we're using Dr. Seuss as an example, because I like Dr. Seuss and it's fun to read. And so, but we're going to go. But when we talk about these, a lot of the books that Dr. Seuss has written get a lot of love, right? Everybody knows Green Eggs and Ham. Everybody knows The Cat in the Hat. But when I say this one, not as many people know it. And so, thank you. I see that you know it, but not everybody knows it, Josie. And that's why I'm excited to introduce some of you to the first, maybe for the first time, maybe you've heard it before, the Sneetches and Other Stories by Dr. Seuss. Now, I had a long time where I was deciding, were we just gonna do one story, or were we gonna do all four, or a combination of some? And we're gonna do all four stories in the Sneetches. So, if you'd like to read this with me, you can come on up. We'll read The Sneetches by Dr. Seuss. Hi. What did you need? Yeah, we're gonna do all four. Yeah. Good idea. Okay. So I want to make sure everybody up here who wants to read it. Anybody? You can come on up. You can come on up. I just wanted to make sure. I see some heads back there that maybe haven't come up here yet, and some heads out there that still haven't come up. Okay. Yes, thank you. It feels real when someone's sitting on my feet. Oh. It says, Melody from Mommy and Daddy, 12, 13, 15. Aww. This is one of the escapades of books that we got when we were doing that big, basically every single day of December we got a book. It was fun. Was that fun? The Sneetches and Other Stories by Dr. Seuss. The Sneetches. Now, the star-belly Sneetches had bellies with stars. The plain-belly Sneetches had none upon theirs. Those stars weren't so big. They were really so small you might think such a thing wouldn't matter at all. But because they had stars, all the star-belly Sneetches would brag, "We're the best kind of Sneetch on the beaches." With their snoots in the air, they'd sniff and they'd sort. "We'll have nothing to do with that plain-belly sort." And whenever they met some, when they were out walking, they'd hike right on past them without even talking. When the star-belly Sneetches had Frankfurter roast, or picnics, or parties, or marshmallow toast, they never invited the plain-belly Sneetches. They left them out cold in the dark of the beaches. They kept them away, never let them come near, and that's how they treated them year after year. I've read it many times. Then one day it seems, while the plain-belly Sneetches were moping and doping alone on the beaches, just sitting there wishing their bellies had stars, a stranger zipped up in the strangest of cars. "My friends," he announced in a voice clear and clean, "my name is Sylvester McMonkey McBean. I've heard of your troubles. I hear you're unhappy, but I can fix that. I'm a fix-it-up chappy. I've come here to help you. I have what you need. My prices are low and I work at great speed, and my work is 100% guaranteed." Then quickly Sylvester McMonkey McBean put together a very peculiar machine, and he said, "You want stars like a starbelly Sneetch? My friends, you can have them for $3 each. Just pay me your money and hop right aboard." So they clambered inside, and the big machine roared, and it bonked, and it clonked, and it bonked, and it jerked, and it burked, and it bobbed them about, but the thing really worked. When the plain-belly Sneetches popped out, they had stars. They actually did. They had stars upon theirs. They've got stars now. Then they yelled at the ones who had stars from the start, "We're exactly like you. You can't tell us apart. We're all the same now, you snooty old smarties. And now we can go to your Frankfurter parties." "Good grief," groaned the ones who had stars at the first. "We're still the best Sneetches and they are the worst. But how will we know," they all frowned, "if which kind is what or the other way round?"
I was thinking about this when we first started reading this. They should just like stick together as a family and then they could just walk around and they could know.
Well, but they all look the same now. They all look the same. So they're like, how can we possibly know? That's a good idea. But they're thinking, oh, but if I don't know this person, I don't know, they're not my family. But then up came McBean with a very sly wink, and he said, "Things are not quite as bad as you think. So you don't know who's who. That's perfectly true. Just stick with me, friends, and you know what I'll do? I'll make you again the best Sneetches on beaches. And all it'll cost you is $10 eaches." "Billy stars are no longer in style," said McBean. "What you need is a trip through my star-off machine. This wondrous contraption will take off your stars, so you won't look like them who have them on theirs." And that handy machine, working very precisely, removed all the stars from their tummies quite nicely. With snoots in the air, they paraded about, and they opened their beaks, and they let out a shout. "We know who's who now, there's no doubt. The best kind of Sneetches are Sneetches without." Then, of course, those with stars all got frightfully mad. To be wearing a star now was frightfully bad. Then, of course, old Sylvester McMonkey McBean invited them into his star-off machine. And then, of course, from then on, as you probably guess, things really got into a horrible mess. All the rest of that day on those wild screaming beaches, the fix-it-up chappie kept fixing up Sneetches. Off again, on again, in again, out again. Through the machines, they raced round and about again, changing their stars every minute or two. They kept paying money. They kept running through until neither the plane nor the starbellies knew whether this one was that one, or that one was this one, or which one was what one, or what one was who. Then, when every last cent of their money was spent, the fix-it-up chappie packed up and he went, and he laughed as he drove in his car up the beach. They never will learn. No, you can't teach a Sneetch. But McBean was quite wrong. I'm quite happy to say that the Sneetches got really quite smart on that day. The day they decided that Sneetches are Sneetches, and no kind of Sneetch is the best on the beaches. And that day, all the Sneetches forgot about stars, and whether they had one or not upon theirs. Story number 2, the Zacks. One day, making tracks in the prairie of Prax, came a north-going Zacks and a south-going Zacks. And it happened that they came to a place where they bumped. There they stood, foot to foot, face to face. "Look here now," the north-going Zacks said. "I say, you are blocking my path. You are right in my way. I'm a north-going Zacks, and I always go now north. So get out of my way now and let me go forth." "Who's in whose way?" snapped the south-going Zacks. "I always go south, making south-going tracks. So you're in my way, and I ask you to move and let me go south in my south-going groove." The north-going Zacks puffed his chest up with pride. "I never," he said, "take a step to one side, and I'll prove to you that I won't change my ways if I have to keep standing here for 59 days. "And I'll prove to you," yelled the south-going Zacks, "that I can stand here in the prairie of Prax for 59 years. For I live by a rule that I learned as a boy back in south-going school. Never budge, that's my rule, never budge in the least, not an inch to the west, not an inch to the east. I'll stay here not budging, I can and I will, if it makes you and me and the whole world stand still." Of course, the world didn't stand still. The world grew. In a couple of years, the new highway came through, and they built it right over those stubborn Zacks and left them there standing, unbudged in their tracks. Too many days. Did I ever tell you that Mrs. McCabe had 23 sons, and she named them all Dave?
When you get it wrong. Yeah.
Well, she did. And that wasn't a smart thing to do. You see, when she wants one and calls out, "Yoo-hoo, come into the house, Dave," she doesn't get one. All 23 Daves of her come on the run. This makes things quite difficult at the McCaves, as you can imagine, with so many Daves. And often she wishes that when they were born, she'd name one of them Bodkin Vedhorn, and one of them Who's Foos, and one of them Snim, and one of them Hot Shot, and one Sunny Jim, and one of them Shadrach, and one of them Blinky, and one of them Stuffy, and one of them Stinky, another one Put Put, another one Moon Face, another one Marvin Gravel Balloon Face, one of them Ziggy, and one Soggy Muff, one Buffalo Bill, and one Biffalo Buff, and one of them Sneepy, and one Weepy Weed, and one Paris Garters, and one Harris Tweed, and one Sir Michael Carmichael Zut, another one Oliver Bolivar Butt, and one of them Zanzibar Buck McFate. But she didn't do it, and now it's too late. What was I scared of? Well, I was walking in the night, and I saw nothing scary, for I have never been afraid of anything, not very. Then I was deep within the woods when suddenly I spied them. I saw a pair of pale green pants with nobody inside them. I wasn't scared, but yet I stopped. What could those pants be there for? What could a pair of pants at night be standing in the air for? And then they moved, those empty pants. They kind of started bumping. And then my heart, I must admit, it kind of started thumping. And so I got out. I got out fast as I could go, sir. I wasn't scared, but pants like that I did not care for. No, sir. And then a week went by, and then after that a week went by, then one dark night in Greenwich, I had to do an errand there and fetch some Greenwich spinach. Well, I had fetched the spinach. I was starting back through town when those pants raced around the corner, and they almost knocked me down. I lost my Greenwich spinach, but I didn't even care. I ran for home. Believe me, I had really had a scare. Now, bicycles were never made for pale green pants to ride them, especially spooky pale green pants with nobody inside them. And the next night, I was fishing for trout on River River when those pants came rowing toward me. Well, I started in to shiver, and by now I was so frightened that I tell you, but I hate to. I screamed and rode away and lost my hook and line and bait too. I ran and found a brickle bush. I hid myself away. I got brickles in my britches, but I stayed there anyway. I stayed all night. The next night too. I'd be there still, no doubt. But I had to do an errand, so the next night I went out. I had to do an errand. Had to pick a peck of snide in a dark and gloomy snide field that was almost 9 miles wide. I said, I do not fear those pants with nobody inside them. I said and said and said those words. I said them, but I lied them. And then I reached inside a snide bush, and the next thing that I knew, I felt my hand touch someone, and I bet that you know who. And there I was, caught in the snide and in that dreadful place. Those spooky empty pants and I were standing face to face. I yelled for help. I screamed, I shrieked, I howled, I yelled, I cried. Oh, save me from these pale green pants with nobody inside. But then a strange thing happened. Those pants began to cry. Those pants began to tremble. They were just as scared as I. I never heard such whimpering, and I began to see that I was just as strange to them as they were strange to me. I put my arm around their waist and sat right down beside them. I calmed them down, poor empty pants with nobody inside them. And there he is, calming down the pants. And now we meet quite often, those empty pants and I, and we never shake or tremble. We both smile and we say, hi. The end. Thank you so much.
I have a question.
Yes.
Why do you just wear the pants?
I can't answer that one for you.
They were too big.
There you go. Too big, not his size.
In the wash.
I don't think the pants want to be washed. But, whatever, to each their own. Thank you. You can go sit. Awesome. Good job. Thanks for listening. I know there's a lot of stories. Thank you for listening so intently, because it's important. I love the Sneetches. Now, what's fascinating about this book is that when you look at the timeline, this was written in 1961. Yes, It's sad that sometimes it feels like that book is still as relevant today as it was in 1961. It feels that way. But I like that in every single time he ended a story, he ended it with something he ended with a phrase that was poignant, things that I want us to look at, I want us to check out. When he ended the Sneetches, it was, they forgot about whether they had a star, whether they had one upon them or not, whether they had one or not upon theirs. I like that. I like that his focus is that they got away from whether this was there or not. The Zacks, it says, they left them there standing, unbudged in their tracks. The Zacks never moved. They got stuck. They got stuck in their uncompromising ways. Too many Daves, but she didn't do it. And now it's too late. This idea of not being able to change the way what she had done. And then, of course, what was I scared of? We never shake or tremble. We both smile and we say hi. And when I read these, really, the first one, I think, is the most clear when it comes to what does it mean to what can we learn, what can we take from this story. When we look at the Sneetches, we see something important. People can be focused on the things that they think makes them better than others because they want to be better. They think they focus on these unimportant things. The stars weren't so big, they were really so small, you might think such a thing wouldn't matter at all. That's the way that he frames the understanding. It's so small, it seems so insignificant to us. When we look at it from the outside and we see whether they had stars or whether they didn't have stars. But you know, when I think about that, it's the same thing happened in our world not too long ago. He's writing in 1961, in a time where they were still trying to figure out how to deal with people of different melanin levels in their skin. We were at the Children's Museum this past weekend, and it was a fascinating experience to go see the Children's Museum. One of the things they have is they have a section in the Children Who Changed the World, and there's one about Ruby Bridges, and about the fact that people, because they had different melanin levels in their skin, they said, you can't come to school with us, you can't do life with us, you can't drink from the same water fountain as us. They said, because you are not like us, we're going to create laws that separate us. We're going to create segregated school systems. Things that, when we look at what it is, it's really so small, you think they shouldn't matter at all. They were so focused, the Sneetches were so focused about the stars on their belly that they forgot about the star over Bethlehem. We get so bent out of shape about the color of skin that we can't see that God made all those many different colors. So I want to take a look at something that Jesus said when we think about the Sneetches and what's happening in this story, and maybe tie it in to the gospel itself. This story, the same story, comes up in all the synoptics. So we're going to be looking, you can turn to Matthew 22, Mark 12, or Luke 10. Take your pick your favorite. The synoptics are the ones that all sound similar. When you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, especially you guys, does it feel like you're reading the same thing sometimes? It feels like, yeah, some of the words are the same. That's because they're called synoptics. They see the same stories. Now, of course, there's differences. And when you see differences, they should be like red flags and alarm bells going, why is this one different for him? Why does he word it differently? So it's important things. But in all of them, somebody comes up and asks Jesus a question. In Matthew and Mark, the question is, what's the greatest commandment? Which one is the most important of all? And in Luke, it's, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And both in Matthew and Mark, what Jesus is doing is that what's happening in the time of Jesus is that there are Pharisees. Do you know the Pharisees? Who knows the Pharisees? Raise your hand. Just want to make sure you're paying attention. Who's heard of the Pharisees before? Okay, well, if you haven't, because some of you still didn't raise your hand, the Pharisees were a group of people who were actually very similar to Jesus in theology, but they were not very good about living it out. They sounded like Jesus when they talked, but they didn't love people. And Jesus was always about them about love, love, love. love people well, treat them well, follow the weightier matters of the law. But they would also build rules upon rules upon rules. It kept expanding. And so what a lot of people were trying to do, what some Pharisees began doing, is instead of just building what are all the rules, because they already had 613, what more could we figure out? So the idea of don't pick up your mat on the Sabbath day is not in the law, but it's a rule that they added so that they could keep the honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. Do you see what's going on there? They said, what's the one commandment? People started saying, what's the one commandment that sums up all the rest? Luke sounds different when he says, what must they do to inherit eternal life? But it's actually a similar question. What leads to salvation? Or, in his case, what laws must I keep to inherit salvation? Jesus has a problem with that formula, as he addresses in other places, but he answers or approves of the answer in the same way. He does this. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So if you're in Luke 10, the verse is 27. Go underline it, highlight it, star it, make it a big thing. Say, this is one that you need to keep in mind. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. In Matthew 22, 36 through 40, if you're in Matthew 22, it's 36 through 40. Star it, highlight it, underline it, mark up, say this is, write love beside it. Because they say, what's the greatest commandment? Love God. And the second, this is greatest and most important, 39, love your neighbor as yourself. Mark 12, it's 29 through 31. Again, if you're in Mark, highlight it, underline it, star it, write love beside it. Make sure that you see and understand what's going on here. The most important, Jesus answered, listen, Israel, the Lord our God is one, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. The second is, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no command greater than these. In Matthew, he goes on to say, in verse 40, all the law and the prophets depend on these two commandments. Now, when he says all the law and the prophets, the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, is made up of three groups. The Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. Tanakh, right? The reason why it's those three sections is that the Torah is the law and the Nevi'im is the prophets. So when he says the law and the prophets, he means the entire Old Testament. Because the Ketuvim is the writings. It's the other stuff that's not the law or the prophets. And it's included in when you say law and prophets. So Jesus said, the entire, if I had a paper Bible, I'd show it to you. The entire first 3/4 of the Bible can be summed up according to Jesus, not according to Jake and his wisdom, but according to Jesus with love God and love your neighbor. All of them hang on these commandments. So the answer from Jesus is intriguing for a couple of reasons, a number of different reasons. First, it's not one command, but it's two. They said, well, what's the one? Go down, one. Well, Jesus, we want one. And he said, I don't like that. I'm going to change the answer. I'm going to change the rules. It's two commandments. Love God, love people. And the first one is no surprise, right? We've talked about this before. We've actually talked about these exact passages before. But the Jews to this day still recite the Shema. The listen, Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. They recite it every day, sometimes twice a day. Deuteronomy 6, 4, and 5. Listen, Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. And how does that work out? How do we actually translate it? Great question. But they said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength, with everything that you are, with everything that makes you you. With all your heart. In our day, it's emotions or desirings. In the Jewish mindset, the heart was where the thoughts came from, which is why the Greeks added with all your mind, where your thinking comes from. With your soul, with your muchness, with what makes you you, and with all your strength, your mayod, your physical form, everything that you have. And of course, so yes, Deuteronomy 6, 4, and 5. Put beside that in your whatever version of the gospel that you're in, write down Deuteronomy 6, 4, and 5, because it's so important, it's so crucial to understand that there is a reference there. But the second one is the one that I find fascinating. The second one is not expected. It's one half of one verse in Leviticus. Leviticus 19:18b. The first part is, do not hold a grudge against your neighbor. Good thing to keep in mind. But then it says, but love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus takes the core central tenet of what it means to be a Jewish person, to what it means to be a Jew, and he says, this is number one, and two is Leviticus 19:18b. Love your neighbor as yourself. And he says, these are the greatest commandments. No commandments are greater. And so it's interesting, but it's more important than what I think are these fascinating, intriguing theological points, is that when we look at the words of Jesus Christ, there isn't wiggle room around those to whom we must give our love. We don't get to cherry pick who we love. Love God, love people, full stop. Love God with everything. With everything that we have, with everything that we are, we desire and love God. But then secondly, because that seems like the easy one. Secondly is loving people. The guy said, well, who's my neighbor? Who's one of the guys that was asking the question, well, Jesus, who's the guy I've got to love? And Jesus said, even the Samaritan. He gives the story of the Good Samaritan. And of course, in that day, a Good Samaritan was an oxymoron. One who cares, a Samaritan who treats one as a neighbor would. So Jesus is saying, it's anyone that you come in contact with. It's not just your next door neighbor. It's not just the people beside you in the pew. It's not just the people that you do work with. It's the people who you come into contact with. If they cross your path, they are your neighbor. And so then he also says, love your neighbor as yourself. And in many places and many people around the world, that's not the hard one. But for some of us, that is the hard one. How do we love ourselves? Especially when we look at our lives and our life is difficult. We've pushed people away. We've hurt people. We're not providing the way we want to provide or loving people the way we want to love. How can we love ourselves? So it's simple, but it's not easy. That's an important thing to keep in mind. It's simple to understand what he's calling us to here. Loving God, loving people, loving ourselves. Loving God, loving other people, loving ourselves. That's the command that Jesus gives. But it's not easy doing that. It's not easy when life is difficult and we're wondering where God is in the midst of our crises. It's not easy to love God. It's simple, but it's not easy. It's not easy to love people when they are so frustrating, when they're so difficult, when our friends have turned their backs on us again, when our boss has said the same insensitive, mean thing again, playing it off as a joke. It's not easy when we can see the darkest sides of ourselves. But we're called to love God, love people, and love ourselves. So let me spell it out. We ask the question, so the thing is, well, okay, you've said love people. Who does that mean? Who does that include? Who's excluded from the group? Are they red, yellow, black, and white? They're precious in his sight. Love them. Well, what if they're gay or transgender? Love them. What if they're Muslim or Buddhist? Love them. What if they're a Packers or Purdue fan? Even them, guys. Love them. Sad, sad souls. You don't get a choice. And I'm saying you, I mean we. I could say we don't get a choice. We don't get a choice of who we get to love. We signed up for this Jesus thing. We said having salvation sounds better than the alternative. I agree, it does. And then, so he said, great, but you gotta love people. And we don't get to then say, nah, thanks, I'm good. I'm gonna take a back seat on that whole love thing. But thanks for salvation, though. He doesn't give us that option. It's not a guy who's like, oh, do you want to try something at the buffet that I've cooked for you? It's a king saying, all right, I'm protecting you. You're not going to be destroyed at the end of time, but you got to love people. And we say, yes, sir. We don't get a choice to say, well, I don't like that guy. I don't like that girl. I don't like this person. I don't like this group of people. None of that is acceptable. Jesus says, love them. Paul goes a step further in Galatians to show you the importance of this. Galatians 5:14 says this, for the entire law is fulfilled in one statement, love your neighbor as yourself. When the Sneetches forgot about the stars on their bellies, and Dr. Seuss himself said that was a focus on racism, but also anti-Semitism. He was saying, I want to oppose that in my writings. When the Sneetches forgot about the stars on the bellies, they began to see the Sneetch underneath. And Sneetches underneaches are loved by God on all of the beaches. And so we know the object of our love. The object of what we must love is first God, second other people, and third ourselves. But our love also, though, has a diversity to it. I don't want to harp on this too long, but I wanted to talk about too many days. We're going to skip to the third story that we read. So you may be saying, and I was thinking, God called me to love everybody. And that's really easy, because I'm going to view everyone as essentially the same person. Everybody's the same. There's a show called Scrubs that was on back in the day. And one of the things that I remember saying, one of the quotes was sort of I guess he's the bad guy, if there could be a bad guy, said, to save us all time, I'm going to call all the guys Daves and all the girls Debbies. And there's a joke in there that I'll let you go find. It's funny. But he says, I'm going to call you're all the same, except for the one girl who was actually named Debbie. She was called Slagathor. You know, it's not nice. He's the bad guy, like I said. Don't emulate it. But the idea of Daves and Debbies, everybody's the same. There's no difference between people. When I look at that, when we look at others as a monolith, that's not what Jesus was trying to get us to do. It's not about just seeing human and loving the generic human thing. It's about seeing them as the person. It's about you seeing the other person beside you and thinking, I love them in their differences. It's about seeing the Jakes and the Bobs and the Johns and the Kalias and the Riches. It's about seeing us as the individuals that we are. I could talk a lot more about this, but we could spend a lot of time on it. But it's a lot of what we talked about last week. We talked about it 2 weeks ago. We talked about that we aren't all hands and feet, but eyes and ears and mouth and nose, head, shoulders, knees, toes, right? That's what we are. Yes, woo, and then up and down, all the body of Christ. When we have all these different parts, that's what it means to be the body, is to celebrate others in our differences. To look at you and for you to look at me and go, I don't want you to be more like me, so that we lose all the differences so it's easier to love you. It's saying, I'm going to love you right in the difference that you have. Right in the differences that you have. It's not about... For example, when you come into church and there's a girl shooting laser beams at you, it's loud and she's crazy and she's my daughter, so I have a certain preference to her. But it's not about saying, you need to look more like me when I come into church. It's saying, how can the joy and exuberance of youth improve my life? Make me see more of that God has given us imagination and brains and controls. And there's some times to say, okay, well, we're gonna be more like the room. We're gonna be more subdued or quiet or more excited and overjoyed. But these times we celebrate the differences in other people's. You're not just a Dave or a Debbie. God didn't make you just like everybody else. If the world were full of a bunch of Jakes, we'd have lots of fun, but we'd never get anything done. it would just be chaos, and our beds would never be made. Our houses would be messy. Not dirty, because that's gross. We wouldn't leave plates with food on them, but we'd never get anything put away. We need to be different, and I celebrate the differences in you. I have people that keep me grounded, that keep me centered, and that's what's important to see. So, we have the objects of our love, other people, the people in this room especially. But then we also have the diversity. You're going to be different. We're going to be different very much. But how do we go to a path toward that love? And this is how the story of the Zacks comes into play. They left them there standing unbudged in their tracks at the end of it. When we look from the outside, seeing the highways built over the Zacks and the roads built around them, we can laugh and shake our heads, oh, silly Zacks. What are they thinking? Don't they see that this is ridiculous? But how many times in our most heated arguments and our biggest discussions and debates do we do the exact same thing? The Zacks should be able to move to the left or the right, or even just froggy hop, right? One of them bend over, the other one hop over, then boom. They don't even have to go left or right. They could just figure it out. But they stood there to do, we see that. But you can't, but when then we say, you can't expect me to compromise with someone else. But I'm not expecting anything of anyone. God's expecting it of me first. Let's take a look at Ephesians 5. Flip on over to Ephesians 5. We're going to be looking at verses 15 through 21. If you're there, hold your Bible up. Let me see, you got it? Anybody? We got some Bibles raised up. Thank you. Pay careful attention, then, to how you walk, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time because the days are evil. So don't be foolish and understand what the Lord's will is. This is Ephesians 5:15. Did I say 15? I don't know if I did. We're now in verse 18. And don't get drunk with wine, which leads to reckless action, but be filled with the Spirit. Verse 19, speaking to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing and making music from your heart to the Lord, giving thanks always for everything to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. And then submitting to one another in the fear of Christ. Paul, right up to 20, you had me. Right up through 20, giving thanks to God. And then, could you just go back and just scratch out 21? Can we do that, Paul? Can we have that agreement? What does he say? Submitting to one another in reverence for Christ, in the fear of Christ. Now, what does that mean? What does submit mean? It means bowing to the wishes of another in love. It's what wives were then commanded to do for their husbands. So this kind of understanding that, which I'll let you talk about that in your relationships. I won't touch on that today. It was but it's this idea of submit, this idea of saying, of giving leeway to the other, of giving somewhat of control, understanding to the other. We're not called to compromise with our brothers and sisters. Because the Sneetches, it's talking about compromise. Could they not figure out some way that they could continue to go north and go south? Could they do something along those lines? But instead, we're called not to compromise. We're called to submit. And of course, we're not talking about throwing out biblical principles the first time that a person who says they're Christian makes a radical claim. But that is the ridiculous end of the spectrum and not at all what really is happening in our churches. What submission looks like is something much more mundane. It's about listening to other people and taking what they have to say seriously. Submitting to your spouse and to other group members and going to a home gathering. That's part of what submission is. I'm going to talk to a lot of guys right now. Guys, it's uncomfortable. We don't like to go to things. We don't like to share our emotions. It doesn't feel good. But a part of what it means to be part of the family of Christ is to submit to the other and say, look, I'm going to go because other people need me as much as I need them. To see it as a privilege and a duty to go to these places, to be part of these home gatherings. And so, submission in our week-to-week life is saying, what's going on in our church that I can submit to, that makes me uncomfortable but may be good. And I write that one and it makes me feel very uncomfortable, because on the other side, submission is me listening to people and saying, when people are saying these aren't going well, I need to be able to submit. It's not just a top down. What happens is the fact that we're all equal in this. I'm submitting to you as you're submitting to me. That's what this is. That's what this looks like. It's saying, how can we be the best body of Christ? It's not one hand trying to control the whole thing. The whole body is working together as the head leads us. And if one part goes crazy and goes aside, then we all fail. We work together. We work hand in hand. So this is what Philippians is talking about. Philippians 2:3. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or empty pride, but in humility consider others more important than yourselves. When we talk about what it means to submit to the other, it's saying your desires, your will, what it means for you to succeed, for what it means for you to be closer to God, is more important than what it means for me. It's all about submission. We don't just go for compromise. It would be wonderful to have, in all the decisions that we make as a body, unanimous agreement. Now, do we always get there? Maybe not. But could we strive for it? Yes. And then we have the benefit of our love. So we have the objects of our love, and that those are people in all of their diversity. And a path towards love is submission. Understanding that allowing other people to be themselves while we work with and around and through them. And then the question is, what's the benefit of our love once we have it? So we love one another. Let's see what old man John has to say about that. 1 John 4. 1 John 4, 16 through 18. 1 John 4, 16 through 18 says, and we have come to know and believe that the love that God has for us. God is love. And the one who remains in love remains in God and God in him. In this, love is perfected with us so that we may have confidence in the day of judgment. For we are as he is in the world. There is no fear in love. Instead, perfect love drives out fear, because fear involves punishment. So the one who fears has not reached perfection in love. We love God, we love our neighbor, and in this, by doing this, we know that we are God's children and fear is driven out. That's the benefit of fear is knowing where we stand. The benefit of love is knowing that we don't have to be afraid of the end of life or of life itself. We've got it. We've got eternal life made when we love. And I think God is saying this is true of himself. When we love him perfectly, and when his love is perfected in us, we're not afraid of God. We're not afraid of the time when we will come to him when our lives are over and when we are resurrected in the last day. But more than that, it's shown to be true of humans as well. God has shown it to be true of humans as well. When we begin to try and love those who don't look like us, those who don't act like us, those who don't worship like us, those who don't marry like us, we begin to stop fearing them. There's something to be said for words. We use the words, and sometimes they get thrown our way too often, so I'm not trying to throw them around one more time too often. But the words homophobia and xenophobia, there's a reason why those words are being used. People who hate different kinds of people are not actually afraid. They're not petrified to the point of fear, but many times their hatred lies in the differences that they see. Without knowing or trying to know people who are different, we can't know that we are more similar than we are different. That love drives out the deep fears of our hearts when we spend time to try to love those who are different from us in all the different ways that we've mentioned. It drives out the fear that they are trying to destroy our world, that they're trying to destroy our culture, that they're trying to do this, that, or the other. Whatever fear lies underneath us is driven out, and instead we can have love for them. When we love our fellow humans in the world, we are no longer afraid of them. When we love our brothers and sisters in Christ, we show the world that we are disciples of Christ. When we love each other, the love of God remains in us and is perfected in us. When we love, we know that we stand forgiven and saved. So, we know the objects and the diversity of our love. We know our path toward love, and we know the benefit of our love. And one of the ways we're going to do that today, normally I have a what must I do section, of what do we take from this. And we're going to do that right here and right now. We're going to pray for our brothers and sisters. To do what God has asked, we must love. And to love, you must know what is going on in their lives, and we must show our love in prayer. So earlier, we took some time to sit in silence and pray individually. And what I was hoping your hearts and minds would get connected to is a state of prayer, being in a place of prayer. At this time, I'd like you to find one person, or maybe two, no bigger than a group of three then, to go somewhere in the room. It can be in your seats that you are right now, but so that you can have a place to pray for people, to pray for the needs that they bring. Everybody's going to share their needs. We're going to take some time to pray with one another, and there is no time limit. We do have a closing set of songs that we're going to end with, but there's no rush. And when most people are done, we're going to sing the last couple songs. But we wanted this to be a time where you're able to pray for the needs of others right here in your pew. So find someone or two other people, and we're going to have some time where we're going to pray for each other individually. Okay? May need to stand up, look around, make sure that nobody's left out. Find someone, if someone's not moving, go to them and pray with them. Can I pray with you, Miss Alice?